Well, I don't think there's a more essential issue than the issue of climate change.
The future of the auto industry is electric. There's no turning back.
This is a preview of things to come.
More Americans could soon get the chance to drive a vehicle made in China.
The new vehicles that we're making at Ford are data collection machines. They're like mobile drones.
We're going to be noisy, we're going to be disruptive, we're going to be unignorable, we're going to be a pain in the arse until you listen to us.
Officials have begun a major investigation into whether someone or many people benefited financially from the evil done to the country last Tuesday. Not long before the attacks occurred, there were some financial transactions in the stock market that may indicate knowledge of the attack before it began. If they ever get to the bottom of it, it will be astonishing.
Peter, what many Wall Street analysts believe is that the terrorists made bets that a number of stocks would see their prices fall. They did so by buying what are called puts. If you bet right, the rewards can be huge. The risks are also huge, unless, of course, you know something bad is going to happen to the company you're betting against.
This could very well be insider trading at the worst, most horrific, most evil use you've ever seen in your entire life.
Our intelligence people are not only knew about in advance, but probably involved. There's no question. You cannot possibly have an operation of this magnitude without our people knowing about it.
Truth is not a given.
Vaccine, GMOs,
Jeffrey Epstein,
UFOs.
Splashed.
Mark bearing and range.
There are those who want the truth suppressed, sequestered, and exploited. Then there are those who want the truth revealed, disseminated, and uncensored. You are one of those people.
Chester Bennington. He was 41 years old and the artist was found dead.
I see the need for action. I see the need for a great reset.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society.
Hundreds of abusive clergy.
It was unidentified, and that's why it was so unsettling.
You deserve the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
What's up, everybody? Today is August 24th, 2026. The realest fans know that song right there, that last one for the countdown. For years, that was sort of our theme song here at Dauntless, and I thought it would be appropriate to bring it back. I love that little ditty. Welcome to Dauntless Live. I am your host, Adam Riva. We have an awesome show for you tonight. How was everybody's weekend? Let me know in the chat. We are simulcasting on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute, X, and our website, dauntlessdialogue.com, where you can find a plethora of awesome content. Right here at the top, we have our latest film drop, Order Out of Chaos Volume 6, Put Options. We're going to have Adrian on next week, the filmmaker, to talk all about it. And if you haven't seen it yet, I don't know what you're waiting for. It's a masterpiece, I think. It's an excellent addition to an already awesome series. And if you have seen it, let me know in the comments what you thought. Adrian, of course, loves getting feedback. Our filmmakers are sometimes cut off from the feedback. And so send him a message on social media if you follow him. If you don't follow him, follow him. We have some awesome stuff that you can peruse on our website. We do docuseries, documentaries, short films, feature films. We do entertainment now as well. As you look around the website, you'll get an idea that we're a little bit edgy, and we like it that way. We like to cover subjects that nobody else does. If you want to support us, man, we would really appreciate that, because our bills are much bigger than you probably imagine. It's a lot of overhead here at Dauntless. We are built on independent infrastructure, free speech oriented companies, and we've built a lot of our own infrastructure, and that's very expensive to maintain. There's a reason we did it, though, because we are banned across the board. Every time we pop our head up on a various big tech platform, we get whack-a-moled. So you can support us on a monthly, an annual, or a permanent lifetime basis, and we hope that you consider that. If you tuned in last week, you heard me talk about the Jason Burma situation with the Epstein Files series. After I did last week's show, Jason did reach out to me I'm very thankful that he finally made contact. We hashed it out. We had a good conversation, nice long back and forth, and I think we're on good terms now. I just wanted to close that loop, clear the air. Jason is a good person. I just think that the situation unfolded in a suboptimal way. I have to tell you that the series is not going to be completed. We are going to pivot and we will keep you updated, but don't send Jason hate mail or anything. We love Jason. He was in a little over his head, and that's that. So now, today's discussion, it may surprise you. We are going to be talking about reincarnation. I'm very excited actually to have this conversation with you guys because it's something that I'm very curious about, something I'm interested in, and I have studied for 15, 20 years or so. Not that I'm any sort of like expert on the subject, totally armchair, but I've read a lot of books on the subject, and we're going to dive into some of them today. This one is the crux of today's conversation. This is the latest book by Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist from Virginia who had compiled for 40 years thousands of case studies on children who spontaneously remember past lives. And it's not a book about reincarnation per se. It's a book about children who claim to remember previous lives. And there's a distinction there. So we'll get into that. And I'm going to supplement today's conversation with another incredible book. If I had to recommend one of them, I would recommend this one, Thanosis by Jason Rezajorjani. Thanos meaning death, gnosis meaning knowledge. So knowledge of death. This is a spectral investigation. In other words, it's not a singular focused kind of myopic investigation into one aspect of the postmortem subject. It's more of an overview, not an overview to say that it's light. It's actually probably one of the heaviest books I've ever read, not in weight, but in terms of material. It is dense, and you're going to be taking notes in the marginalia because it is a philosophical and scientific powerhouse. And he covers not just reincarnation, but he gets into related subject matter that sort of fleshes out everything that we can know and infer about the time where consciousness, the interval of time between death and rebirth. And so I'm very excited to have this conversation. If you have questions, drop them in the chat. Some of the things that we're going to discuss today is we're going to do a quick overview of the various ontological belief systems with various nations and religions of the postmortem subject and the existence of souls. I will use souls as the preferred go-to word, but of course souls is loaded with religious connotations. So when I say souls, I'm stripping away sort of all of the various loaded associations and referring to, in this sense, just a continuity of consciousness, a continuity of personality in some cases, the continuity of awareness, and some people call it a spirit. So you know what I'm talking about. I'm probably just going to use the word soul. We're going to talk about the difference between sentience and consciousness, what research on plants and animals has taught us about sentience and consciousness, the various types of phenomenological evidence that bolsters the plausibility of the existence of a spirit, as I said, the enduring personality or the soul. We're going to talk about the rise and fall of reincarnation beliefs in cultures and religions over time. Not that that's going to be a large part of the discussion, but it will help frame us in modernity based on the launching of more rigorous and forensic investigations and analyses in the 20th century. We will talk about the various categories of evidence that could support reincarnation, the super psi hypothesis, which is unfalsifiable, and we're going to talk about its limitations. We're going to talk about who Dr. Ian Stevenson is, his rigorous 4-decade-long research program at the University of Virginia, including his methods, his case selection criteria, and his major published works. We're going to talk about how young children spontaneously report detailed, verifiable memories of previous lives, including names, places, deaths, and personal relationships that they could not have known, and we're going to prove that to you. We're going to talk about the striking physical evidence in some of the cases, the more compelling cases, such as birthmarks and birth defects that precisely match the wounds and scars on the identified deceased person's body, which corroborate or connect to the manner of death, and other personality abnormalities that have been observed in children claiming past life memories. We will talk about statistical patterns across more than 2,500 cases, including the high rate of violent and traumatic or unnatural deaths, and the significance of short-term intermission periods after death and before rebirth. We will talk about the continuation of this research by Jim B. Tucker. You can find some of his writings for free online, including strong Western cases such as the James Leninger World War II pilot case. Fascinating. We're going to watch a video clip on that one. Supporting lines of evidence, including xenoglossy, which is the spontaneous, fluent, responsive and creative articulation in a foreign language that is unlearned. We're going to talk about near-death experience research, how that ties in, and information theoretic approaches to consciousness and the simulation theory. We're going to talk about the average amount of time in the interval after death and before reincarnation, and infer or speculate what that could look like based on the existing data. We're going to talk about sex change cases, which we will sort of ask the question, could this help to explain certain gender dysphoria cases? We're going to talk about twin cases, including one previous personality remembered by 2 children, or 2 previous personalities in 1 child. So is the pairing of a soul to a physical body always a 1-to-1 relationship, or are there other permutations? We will talk about cases involving predicted reincarnation by the dying person himself or herself. We're going to talk about certain explanations, common explanations, including fraud, coaching, cultural expectation, genetic memory, or pure living agent psi, the super psi hypothesis, and why they fail to explain the strongest cases. We're going to talk about why the question of reincarnation is no longer just a matter of belief or philosophy, but a serious empirical challenge to materialist science that people need to contend with. They can't dismiss it without offering a more parsimonious and comprehensive explanation. And in the absence of that, you have to go with the most compelling hypothesis. We will talk about possible evidence for a different spirit reincarnating in a body that has physically died and been revived. So we often think when the person is revived after a near-death experience that it's always the same consciousness coming back into that body. And we will talk about some examples where that might not have been the case. Yes, fascinating stuff. We will talk about possible evidence. I mentioned this, but possible evidence for the reincarnation of multiple spirits in one body. We're going to talk about the relationship between reincarnation and evolution and genetics. And lastly, the deeper implications for consciousness, free will, moral agency, personal identity across lives, and what it may mean to approach death with greater awareness and agency. If you like this content, if you find these discussions compelling, interesting, scratching an itch that you have, please share the show with your friends. We do our best here to make these shows information dense, and so you can get your bang for your buck when you listen in. If you appreciate the research, you appreciate what we're doing, please share the show, smash that like button, and let's begin with an excerpt from Thanosis. Now, in Thanosis, Giorgiani, as I mentioned in the intro, he sort of takes a full spectrum approach to the body of evidence that's out there and doesn't just look at one aspect, whereas that's exactly what Ian Stevenson does in his monographs. And a monograph is basically anything that's published as a book on a singular subject. It could be an artwork, an art piece, it could be a manuscript, it could be an assembly of data. And so he publishes these monographs specifically on children who remember past lives and even adults who remember past lives. When I say remember past lives, from this point forward, understand that I'm using shorthand because I don't want to use the word ostensibly in front of every single mention. So ostensibly remembering past lives. Let's start with a little intro in Thanosis by Jason Rosa Giorgiani. There is no subject of greater importance and of more universal relevance than the question of what, if anything, awaits us after death. Over a century of scientific research in parapsychology or psychotronics, including when it was called psychical research, has produced overwhelming evidence for post-mortem survival. From near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences, to past life recollections as evidence for reincarnation, to cases of possession, and even remote viewing of the afterlife state between death and rebirth. All manner of parapsychological data from tens of survival studies, as parapsychologists call them, point to this conclusion. However, much of the evidence has been spun and interpreted in a way that is warped by selection bias. It is high time for a rigorous and honest philosophical study of the afterlife. In this study, titled Thanosis, a contraction of thanatos, death, and gnosis, esoteric knowing, the most disturbing evidence that has emerged from various survival studies will be faced head-on. These cases will be considered together with all of the various types of evidence for life after death in order to develop and propose an ontological and epistemological framework for understanding what the soul is and what role it plays in the structure of the cosmos. Now, Giorgiani doesn't just opine based on available data. He actually proposes a means by which we can cultivate greater agency in the process of reincarnation. Now, if you're jumping out of your seat, you're like, you haven't even proven or made the case yet for reincarnation, buckle up, we're about to. So the existence of a spirit, a soul, an enduring personality that is housed within the corporeal form is bolstered by various types of phenomenological evidence. Now, you don't need to believe in any one particular attribute here or line of evidence. However, I think the totality of the evidence sort of reinforces itself given the breadth of various phenomena that lack a meaningful and parsimonious explanation. So we're talking about near-death experiences, after-death communications, reincarnation cases, as we'll get into today, mediumship, apparitions or ghosts and spirits, poltergeists, that sort of thing, telepathic impressions, telepathic dreams, lucid dreams, out-of-body experiences, hypnotic regression, xenoglossy, as we mentioned, it's a responsive creative fluency in an unlearned language, instrumental transcommunication, this is the sort of phenomena of like a seance where there's some object being interacted with by the spirit on the other side, remote viewing, possession, and this all ties in with much of the emergent scientific evidence as of late investigating the simulation hypothesis of the universe. You don't need to adhere to any one particular train of thought there, but I encourage you to open your mind, because I think they sort of have a bedrock of evidence under each one that at least creates at least lends it to plausibility. Now, okay, so according to Dr. Ian Stevenson, we'll get into who he is in a moment, the following types of evidence for reincarnation are past life readings done by another person. He says these are the weakest form of evidence. They can almost be thrown out altogether. Hypnotic regression, a little bit better. Dreams and nightmares. And you might say, well, what is a dream and a nightmare? Well, if there's information gathered there that then checks out later and corroborates details in the real world, that's very interesting. Illnesses and drugs. So often you'll have an individual who has spontaneous recall or claims to have spontaneous recall when they're enduring some sort of dramatic illness, or when they're induced into a drug-induced, they will have some sort of recall. Meditation is another example. That one is very low on the totem for value. Miscellaneous waking experiences of adults and spontaneous experiences of young children. And so Stevenson explicitly preferred spontaneous child cases over hypnotic regression because the latter introduced suggestion and confabulation risks he considered scientifically weaker. Confabulation is when you falsely remember something, but you're convinced that you're remembering it correctly. And so if we are to frame the core question, does some aspect of our personality, our consciousness, endure the death process? And then if it does, what is the next step? Now, much of the world believes in a heaven and hell sort of final destination. But second to that is the belief in reincarnation. And the belief in reincarnation is at least twice as popular as the materialist, reductionist, often atheistic belief that there is no such thing as a soul, that the spirit is a mirage. It's an emergent property of synaptic neurological processes. All right, now we're going to read an excerpt from Children Who Remember Previous Lives. I have the revised edition, which is updated with a tremendous amount of material. This came out 10 years after his original publishing of this one, and there was a lot more published in the literature that he could lean on. And so I'm gonna pause that. I'm gonna come back to that quote. I think that's actually jumping the shark a little bit, right? So there is the materialist default position, I think, by most scientists and people in academia, and this is that consciousness is just a byproduct of the brain and it totally extinguishes at death. We will present a very, I think, challenging case for them to rebut. And we're going to also talk about the rise and fall of the belief in reincarnation in various nations and cultures. And so to start with that, and I think this is useful because what I'm assuming much of my audience is coming from a Christian persuasion or Judeo-Christian persuasion, and we're going to actually show you that there were many early Christians who totally believed in reincarnation, and that this was actually stamped out at a certain Council of Constantinople. And so let's start here. Although the belief in reincarnation among different peoples was probably initiated by claims to remember previous lives. Once the belief becomes established, it may persist for many years in the absence of supporting evidence. For example, although Hindus have believed in reincarnation for perhaps several thousand years, we find no trace of anything corresponding to a modern case of the reincarnation type in India until the beginning of the 18th century. And this case appears to have had no successors, certainly none known to me, until the early years of the 20th century. Yeah, so it was so common in India for the Hindus that they didn't even bother to document what could have been millions of cases. It was just absolutely normal to them. We should, however, remember that many cases may have occurred in India before the 20th century without having any record of them. I am sure that the cases about which I learned in that century represent only a small fraction of all that have occurred, and in former centuries our modern facilities for reporting and disseminating information about cases would be lacking. Moreover, the beliefs of Hinduism might have made memories of previous lives seem normal and in no need of being recorded or even noticed. The Cathars of southwestern France provide another example of a group having a strong belief in reincarnation, although we have received from them almost nothing in the way of cases. The Cathars were a heretical Christian sect during the 12th and 13th centuries. In the middle of the 13th century, the forces of King Louis IX of France and northern French nobles effectively extirpated them. The records of the Cathars themselves seem largely to have been destroyed, and most of what we know about them derives from records of their persecutors, the monks of the Inquisition. Here again, however, the paucity in cases known to us does not mean that no others occurred. So, did they not document lots of cases because there weren't any, or because it was normal? So this is a question we can sort of wrestle with. He goes on to talk about the Tibetans, and I'm going to skip ahead because, again, I have a feeling that much of my audience is from the Christian background, and so we're going to address that. He says, we also know that at least some Christians of Southern Europe believed in reincarnation up until the 6th century. It did not then form part of an official instruction, but leaders of the church appear to have tolerated it as an acceptable concept until the Council of Constantinople in AD 553. We may debate whether the actions of this council as a whole, and those of a group of clerics outside the council, but associated with it, constituted a binding official ban on the teaching of reincarnation. Yet certainly a decline in the acceptability of the idea set in among Orthodox Christians at about this time, and has persisted since. So I think most of us, I'm just going to speak for myself at least, I believe that at the Council of Nicaea in circa 325, give or take, that the assembly of the apocryphal texts, the stripping from the mainline biblical corpus, these various widely accepted sacred texts were removed and effectively banned. They were not endorsed by the church. And my belief is that there were a lot of truths hidden in the Apocrypha, the Book of Enoch, the 12 tribes, the 12 patriarchs, or whatever. There are a number of books that, in my opinion, talk about extraterrestrials or ancient astronauts, things of that nature. We can debate that. We don't have to agree on that. That's all good. That's just the conclusion I've come to. And it makes you wonder. There are reasons, perhaps political, perhaps reasons coming from a Weltanschauungskrieg perspective, which is to say the Germans had a word, Weltanschauungskrieg, which was the worldview warfare. It was mistransliterated by American forces moving into Germany at the end of World War II as psychological warfare, but that, again, was a Western misinterpretation. Weltanschauungskrieg was really the idea that you shape reality physically and literally by the beliefs that you inculcate and cultivate in a respective population via commission or omission of details. So you could understand how a very corrupt emperor or a very corrupt empire could politically bastardize sacred texts for a pernicious agenda. I think that's a very reasonable and likely assumption. So could the same be true for the Council of Constantinople, which purged the belief in reincarnation, which persisted until the 6th century AD? Food for thought. All right. Dr. Ian Stevenson is a cool cat. For 40 years at the University of Virginia, he initiated a program that basically sought to interview and forensically investigate in a scientifically precise a way the claims of these often children who claim to remember past lives. And if this is your first time hearing this information, I have a feeling that the evidence discovered will shake you to your core. I have a feeling that you will attempt to take this square peg and try to fit it into the round hole of whatever persuasion you're coming from, whether it's a religious persuasion or just a Western American persuasion, perhaps. And you go, but this isn't culturally accepted around me. This isn't what my family taught me about. This is the first time I'm hearing this information, and it's a little bit mind-boggling. But I think that you'll see that the case for reincarnation is so robust that it really will challenge you to wrestle with it. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine who is a Christian a month and a half ago, and we were talking about this, and I said, how do you make sense of this information? I explained to him thoroughly the premises and gave examples, and he said, I don't look into it. I sort of just ignore it. That was his honest answer. And I thought, well, kudos for your honesty, but in my opinion, that's a philosophical failure. You have to contend with evidence in the real world as it presents itself to you. You can't just shoo it away. I mean, you can. Ayn Rand said, man is free to live an unconscious life, but man is not free to escape the consequences of an unconscious life. So if you choose to ignore the very compelling evidence, well, go about your life. I don't know what to tell you. But ignoring this doesn't falsify it. And those who try to contend with it, in my opinion, put forward very, very weak argumentation to rebut it and refute it. We will give the devil his day in court. We will allow for the arguments to be made today in devil's advocacy, but I believe that they are very, very weak. All right, we're going to go back now. No, actually, you know what? I'm still going to save that. I feel like it's better at the end. So I believe that the case is closed on the existence of souls. It is definitive, in my opinion. And I think the volumes of data that converge support the existence of a spirit, a soul, a personality complex. Now, beyond that, we can make larger and more thorough arguments for what reality is, how souls actually come into formation, and what they are and what they represent. there are some very interesting arguments around simulation hypothesis. I tend to find that older people reject that. I tend to find that younger people accept that, and maybe that's just a sign of the technological turning of the fourth turning and such. And that's not disrespect to anyone who's older. I think that it's just that we're moving into such a digital age that these concepts are much more plausible. It's like if we're already at this stage where we have controllable world models, which is real-time artificial intelligence generated worlds that you can, simulated worlds that you can walk through, and they manifest in real time. So if you turn your head this way, the world right there will manifest. This is now being explored for video games, and we've talked about this on previous shows over the past year. It's an exciting and interesting and novel development technologically. I think that if we're already creating controllable world models in 2026, that is the Matrix. Now, how complex and how immersive and how realistic it'll become, where you actually believe that you are in base reality when you're actually just in a simulation, we can talk about that another day. Again, I'm not here to make any argument necessarily for simulation hypothesis. I just feel like it's relevant to this discussion, so I felt like I would give it a quick mention. And then, of course, there's the alternative, which is, I think, propounded by most revealed religions, which is to say you have this sort of ethereal counterpart to the corporeal. You have the physical and you have the sort of astral, yin and yang components of the universe, and that if you're not in the physical form, then you leave and you're in either one of two places, heaven or hell, or some variation of that model. At different times, there were lots of people who believed in purgatory and limbo, and some people don't even believe in hell. They just believe in heaven, and there's so many different variations that I've heard. So what's your flavor? So Ian Stevenson, let's get into his work. Let's now start to flesh out some of the interesting evidence and see if it holds any water. So Stevenson was then chairman of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Virginia, and he began a systematic fieldwork in 1961 after early theoretical work on survival evidence. He focused exclusively on spontaneous, so non-hypnotic statements by young children, typically aged 2 to 5. I find that as a compelling detail, because these are children that are so young, and when you see how robust their claims are and how specific their claims are, these children didn't have the biggest imaginations. They were very, very young. And it was before cultural contamination. So how much television had they watched at 2 years old? How many movies? How many conversations at cocktail parties are 2-year-olds having? None. They're just basically in the nest with the parents. And oftentimes the parents totally reject the children's claims at first. They dismiss it. They tell them that they're fabricating this information. They tell them that they're wrong, or that it's just a figment of their imagination, and to ignore it. The children often believe that these memories are absolutely real as their lived, tangible experience. These recalled flashbacks or dreams or nightmares are sort of, out of place chronologically. They're obviously flashbacks brought to the present, but they're just as real. Many cases involve testimonies where the parents try to convince the child that this is to be dropped and not mentioned again, and it persists. And so Stevenson collected and analyzed more than 2,500 cases worldwide by the time of his later work, and approximately 2,600 reported cases of past life memories, with 65 detailed published reports in his early volumes. And so he had key methodological controls, such as interviews with child and both families. Interviews with the child and both families before they all met, whenever possible. Independent verification of statements against historical records, medical documents, hospital records, local informants, attention to timing of the statements relative to verification. So, the earlier and the sooner and the more documented those cases were, the more compelling they were. And so I'm going to show you here some of his books, many of which are now in, I don't know if they're in the public domain, but they're available on the internet. So you can start reading them for free. 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation. This was published in 1966. Yep. And revised in 1974. This was sort of his first swing. And then later he went to... after this, he did a 4-volume series called, let me check my notes, Cases of the Reincarnation Type. And I found volumes 2 and 3 on archive.org. I didn't see volume 1 and 4, but I'm sure they're out there. And then there was this, Reincarnation and Biology, a contribution to the etiology of birthmarks and birth defects. And there's 2 volumes, so there's that one and this one. And he also did Where Reincarnation and Biology Intersect, published in 1997. And of course, the one in my hand, Children Who Remember Previous Lives, which I would recommend out of all of them because this was his later work, and so it's really the strongest overview of all of his investigations compiled. So you can start checking that out. If you're interested, you can read further. But just before we go deeper, while we're talking about supplemental viewing, I actually would recommend a series called The Ghost Inside My Child. And there are 13 episodes for free on YouTube. These are very well made, high production value, real interviews with the families and the children. It's edited just like a TV series, so it holds your attention. But these are examples where you can actually see how the children act. You can see the evidence. You can see the pictures. You don't just have to read words on a page. So I highly, highly recommend it. We're going to watch an excerpt from one of these episodes a little bit later with a very compelling case. But type in The Ghost Inside Me, The Ghost Inside My Child on YouTube. It's an awesome series. I've seen several of them, not all of them, but highly recommend it. And now we're going to talk about the continuation and more contemporary research by his successors, people like Jim B. Tucker and the Division of Perceptual Studies. So Jim B. Tucker is also a child psychiatrist and former director of the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia. He's continued Stevenson's work and expanded it. The database now exceeds 2,600 cases. You can find some work by Tucker online for free. He's published cases on he's published literature on American cases that are harder to explain, particularly because of the cultural expectations in America. And one of the examples, notably, was the case of James Leninger. This is a young boy who recalled being a World War II pilot shot down in the Pacific. And right now, we're going to play an excerpt. I hope that the audio comes through. We're only going to show the first 3 minutes or so I'm going to make sure, though, that I can hear the audio. So give me a thumbs up if you can hear this.
James was born April 10th, 1998. That happened to be a Good Friday. He didn't have any health issues. He wasn't a big crier. He wasn't fussy. He was happy. But it was different when he started having the nightmares. It was about 2 weeks after his second birthday. Cooked dinner, gave him his bath, took him to bed, and that was that until about 3 in the morning, and then I just heard screaming. This was blood-curdling screaming, like someone was killing him. He was saying, "Airplane crash on fire, little man can't get out." And that's what he was repeating over and over. "Airplane crash on fire, little man can't get out."
I had to respond. So I started to ask him some questions. What happened to your plane? It got shot. Well, who shot your plane? The Japanese. Well, how do you know it was the Japanese? And I think he said that night, the big red sun.
I wanted the word cuppa, as in cup of tea.
Come on with the commercials.
Where could that come from? How could he articulate something that specific? So I kept going. I said, well, where did your plane come from? And he said, a boat. Did your boat have a name? And he said, yes, Natoma. Here was this history of USS Natoma Bay, CVE 62. This ship supported the Battle of Iwo Jima.
It was, what can you say?
It was a complete mystery. Where could he have gotten that information? How could he say something like that? I had a hard time believing it.
The next day I talked to my mom. I told her that, this is what's going on with James. These are some of the things that he's saying. And my mom said something that made me stop dead in my tracks. My mom said, maybe he's experiencing a past life.
My comment was bull. This is not happening in this house. I don't believe in that stuff. I said, and if that's what you're thinking, then I'm going to prove you all wrong.
I remember one time where James was talking about his airplane. And Bruce had asked him, do you remember what kind of plane you flew? And he said it was a Corsair.
The Corsair was fast. Agility was very good.
I went to the internet, started to do some research, found out that there was no Corsair that flew off in Natoma Bay. And since there was no Corsair on Natoma Bay, all these memories, to be polite, it was just baloney.
One day, James and we were talking. I said, I know you have those nightmares all the time. Who's the little man? Do you remember what your name was? And he said, James. And I said, do you remember what your last name was? And he said, mm-mm. When I talked to Bruce, he was just like, he'll eventually get over whatever it is.
I found a list of men that had been killed serving on World War II aircraft carriers. I went through the list and found the names of 18 men that had been killed aboard Natoma Bay. It was really startling and almost scary. There was one guy killed during the Battle of Iwo Jima, and his name is James M. Houston, Jr.
I remember Bruce on the phone reading this to me, and he said James M. Houston Jr. was the only pilot from the Natoma Bay who had been killed in the battle for Iwo Jima. I know it. It's him. As soon as Bruce found the name James Houston, I really wanted a photo of him. I wanted to know what he looked like. It took me probably 6 weeks of research before I was able to find someone in his family. Ann Barron is the older sister of James Houston. Oh gosh, when she answered the telephone, I was really kind of nervous about it. You can't say, my 2-year-old is, a reincarnated person from somebody in their family. Someone who's 80 years old is just gonna hang up on you. So I said, we were just researching the World War II aircraft carrier called Natoma. She was just the sweetest old lady. So I said, we would love to have photos. Is there any way you could send me some pictures of your brother? And she said, sure, I'd be happy to do that. Believe me, I was checking the mail. Every day I was waiting for the mailman to come. And I got the package, ripped it open, and then as I'm flipping through these pictures Ann sent me, I was like, oh my God! So I called Bruce on the phone, he's at work, I'm like, you've got to come home.
And all all of a sudden there's a picture of James M. Houston Jr. standing in front of a Corsair.
It was huge.
James M. Houston Jr., before he was assigned to Natoma Bay, was in a Navy squadron that flew Corsairs. Shortly after Andrea...
Okay, we'll pause it there. I mean, go watch the rest of it because you can see how that story unfolds as you observed in that one case, of which there's thousands just like it. That one case, well, the father was dismissive, told him it was all bogus. The parents did not believe him. They sought to prove him wrong. They had to do huge amounts of research to verify that he was in fact correct. And once they got pictures from his, the deceased James's sister, then they actually learned a very intimate detail that he flew a Corsair. So the reasonable explanation would, well, the reasonable person would say there's something going on here. It's beyond coaching, and as you'll find in other episodes and other stories, the dates, the names and personal nicknames and residences, behaviors, phobias, likes, dislikes, occupations, jobs, all of these things are verifiable, and the greater the specificity, the more fascinating, in my opinion, and compelling it is. So you have to propose something to explain thousands of these bizarre situations. Now, the strongest cases are called solved cases, and this is where statements are recorded in writing or on video before the previous personality was identified and the two families had any contact. So it's absolutely documented before it's verified. Sometimes the children remember personal objects that were, totems of the person, or certain memorabilia that souvenirs and favorite places to frequent. These are things that are recalled by the children. And the typical age of these statements begins around 2 to 4 years, and the memories usually start to fade around 6 to 8 years of age. Behavioral correspondences include, as we mentioned, phobias or attractions matching the previous death or life circumstances, like an intense fear of water after a drowning death, or unusual skills that could involve tools or vehicles or something. Play patterns, reenacting previous occupations or deaths, recognition of people and places from the previous life upon first meeting. There are so many anomalies that are very specific. There's also a cross-cultural distribution. So you might say this probably only happens in cultures where it is normalized to believe in this. And that's not the case. Although there is a higher density in cultures with pre-existing belief in reincarnation: India, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Myanmar, Lebanon, Turkey, certain Native American groups. Yet there are cases in the West in non-believing contexts where investigators can find them. In some of the most compelling cases, and I really challenge you to put your thinking cap on and come up with a very comprehensive explanation for this. In approximately 35%, more than 1/3 of the cases that Stevenson documented, the subjects exhibited birthmarks or birth defects attributed to wounds or marks on the previous personality. So the most compelling involved cases with 2 corresponding marks matching both an entry and exit wound in the case of stabbings or bullet wounds or other traumatic impalements, surgical scars, stab wounds. I mentioned that. Other documented trauma. So 2, not just 1 birthmark, 2. Yo, that's insane. Stevenson obtained medical or post-mortem records in dozens of these cases. So you go to the hospitals, you find the, previous personalities, death records, autopsy reports and such. And you find, for instance, in 43 out of 48 cases where adequate records were analyzed in one particular series, the child's mark was judged satisfactory or better in the large majority of documented instances. Bonkers. What's up, Andrew? I see you in the chat. Additional physical features are occasionally noted, so facial resemblance, body build, or residual diseases, traits matching the previous person. I want to show now a little bit more of the episode we were just watching. Check this out.
I found James M. Houston Jr.'s sister, Ann Barron. We had the opportunity to visit with her. We felt it was important, and we felt something important would happen. For me, I had this thing in my head, well, maybe this will close the loop.
By this point, we had told Anne the truth. So she knew about James's history. I remember he was instantly very comfortable with her. He didn't have any problem just, going up, putting his arm around her.
He was gentle with her, and he called her Annie.
I asked her about that, and she did say that.
So basically, when the child meets deceased members or friends of the claimed deceased personality, there's often a kinship. There is a familiarity and a comfort. They will often go by the nicknames or remember the nicknames of those individuals.
Jimmy always called her Annie.
He was almost thankful to be next to her.
She said that the information was really shocking and surprising, but that she believed.
Knowing my name and things that my brother did when he was a kid, it's too amazing to describe. I think it's probably a reincarnation of my brother.
I was tired of my entire life revolving around the research for James Houston. So I really felt like we had to go to Chichijima and have a memorial service above the wreckage of where James Houston's plane had crashed.
So in this instance with James, they take him to the place where the previous personality had died, had gone down in the Battle of Iwo Jima, and they do a celebration of life, what do you call it, like basically a funeral for that person, and it gave the child the opportunity to kind of finally let go of that part of the personality and those memories, and then the child was able to move on. And so it's interesting, like if you're a parent and your child is having these nightmares and is very assertive in claims of past life recall, what do you do? How do you take your child to psychiatrists and they're like, I don't know. I mean, this is anomalous. We don't know how to deal with this. And so actually in this case, the child was able to move on after having that funeral. And so in Reincarnation and Biology, which was Stevenson's 1997 book, he presents 225 detailed cases with photographs and medical data. 75 of those cases involved head and neck anomalies alone. And so there seems to be this high percentage of these cases where there was some sort of violent, traumatic, or unnatural death that is overrepresented in the claims, the cases of these previous life recalls. All right, so now let's get into additional corroborating lines of evidence. So apart from Stevenson's investigation where he talked to families, went out, verified with documentation and data, there's also these like just bizarre examples of things that are attached or associated with many of these cases. They're patterns that, again, require some sort of parsimonious and comprehensive explanation that adequately explains the bizarre phenomena. So xenoglossy is one of those patterns. This is where, when the past life memories begin to flood in for the child, or in some cases in adults, they have spontaneous xenoglossy, which is the responsive and creative fluency in an unlearned language. It's rare but definitely documented in certain instances where the child or adult is raised with one language, they have no contact or proximity to the other language, and can suddenly just start speaking it fluently. So what is that? How else would that be explained, particularly when it's in concert with the claims of the past life where that person spoke that language? You know, these are children who are just becoming verbal, and then they're now suddenly speaking in a second language that the parents don't even know how to speak, and they have to go find an interpreter. And so Stevenson investigated several such cases and regarded the authentic responsive xenoglossy as particularly difficult, particularly persuasive for non-survival explanations. Now, I think now is a good time to bring up the super psi hypothesis. And I believe this is put forward by Mishlove. I can't remember his first name. And the super psi hypothesis is that we are all psychic beings, and children who have advanced, precocious abilities in psi can remote view from the age of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. They can remote view and gather the information that they need to hoodwink the investigators and convince their parents and pull off this ruse of recall. Or, I guess maybe the most generous interpretation is that the super psi hypothesis is the children are unknowingly using psi, inadvertently remote viewing answers, and they can't switch it off. It's just something that they have as a dominant part of their personality for reasons unknown. And the problem with the super psi hypothesis, guys, is that it is unfalsifiable. The other problem, and I would say this is the more important detail, is that it doesn't explain away the cases of congenital birth defects, deformations, scars, and birthmarks, particularly the ones, as we mentioned a moment ago, where there are multiple birthmarks, entry and exit wounds, connected to, the cases of claimed previous lives. Fascinating stuff. So what would be are there any other possible explanations? If the super psi hypothesis is sort of immaterial and unfalsifiable and doesn't even explain the best cases, what then? Where do you turn then? We're going to get into the connection between reincarnation and genetics and evolution towards the end of the discussion. There's some, interesting, notable things there, but there needs to be some sort of common explanation for all of these different things. Xenoglossy, congenital birth defects, unknowable information. Now, near-death experience is another pattern for some of them. There are individuals who, as we mentioned earlier, fell into a deep illness. Maybe they had a near-death experience. Maybe they were put on some sort of drug. And that's when it triggered these past life memories. All right. Roughly 70% of the cases of identified previous personality recalls are of an unnatural death, accidental murder, suicide, violent trauma, fire, drowning, warfare, roughly 70%. Now, what does that actually mean? What can we infer from that? Well, how many deaths are violent? How many deaths are traumatic to begin with? How many people die of natural causes? I would say that 70% is statistically significant. I would say that probably anything, above 50% would be statistically significant. I'm not a mathematician, so I'm not going to opine too much on that, but 70% seems outsized. And in these cases, you have the average amount of time for the interval between death and rebirth is approximately 1 to 3 years. But check this out. In Stevenson's research, he found that the cases where there was the fastest turnaround, the quickest, reincarnation, sometimes months, sometimes weeks, those were actually associated with the most birth defects. That's wild, right? So it's like if you are eager to get back in a body and you do it too quickly, you kind of carry with you more of that perhaps information, which then, if our morphology is downstream from information, as I believe it is, then the body will carry over some of that baggage, some of that memory, somatic memory. Behavioral and emotional continuity is often stronger than pure factual memory. So it's not just memories, guys. It's these children have adult-like attitudes, or they express the same behaviors and tendencies and speech patterns and aversions or affinities as the previous life. Now, let's talk about some of the sex change cases. I find these also be interesting. And so, again, for anyone who's just joining us, we're talking about Dr. Ian Stevenson's Children Who Remember Previous Lives and the rest of his corpus. So he talks about some of these sex change cases. The frequencies, of course, vary by culture. Some cultures, it's far more taboo. Some cultures, I don't know. I don't know what the reason is there. But in Stevenson's larger collections, so about 1,200 to 1,500 cases, sex change cases where the child, ends up switching to the other gender, make up about 10% overall. So for women, girls remembering male previous lives and then becoming men, that's actually far more common. It's at a ratio of sometimes 2 to 1, sometimes more. So in one series of studies in Myanmar, there were 208 sex change cases, and the split was about 70-30 in favor of females making the switch to males. And Stevenson suggested that there could be certain cultural or religious factors at play. It's often more socially acceptable for the girl to claim previous male life than for the male to claim previous female life, for fears of it being emasculating and embarrassing. And so often on this channel, we talk about the health-based reasons and the physiological reasons for gender dysphoria. And we've talked a lot about phthalates, the gender bender chemicals. Some are man-made, some are naturally occurring. Some are pesticides like glyphosate and atrazine. Others are, naturally occurring in foods like poultry, for instance. Poultry being the highest source of dietary phthalates. And so you have xenoestrogens. These are man-made chemicals that are going to bond with your alpha receptors in your endocrine system, and they will act like a foot on the pedal, the gas pedal for feminization. This, of course, is nothing new. We know about this, but I would posit that there might be some subset of gender dysphoria cases that could have a basis in these past life memories as living as a different gender and not letting go, right? So as we saw in the case of the child named James, remembering being the World War II pilot, it was so real to him, and he felt that he was that person. And so that is a common theme. If you feel like you are that person, obviously, I mean, I think it just stands to reason that would influence your psychosexual identity complex. Behavioral carryover is common and pronounced. We talked about that. So children in sex change cases frequently display preferences, play styles, clothing choices, attitudes more typical of the previous sex than the current one. A later analysis of the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies, examining hundreds of cases, found that children with sex change memories showed dramatically higher rates of gender nonconforming behavior, up to 80%, compared with children who remembered same-sex lives, about 5.8%. So the association was very statistically significant. Yeah, and so it's just this idea that it sort of reinforces the concept that it's the personality that endures, and the consciousness is the thing that carries over, not necessarily the physical binary of male-female. Now, I suppose now is a good time. I think I meant to cover this at the very beginning, and shame on me, but now is as good a time as ever to talk about the distinction between sentience and consciousness. So this is this might be a little bit of a rant. Okay, so when it comes to sentience is one aspect, let's say, of consciousness, but it isn't equal to consciousness. Sentience is, let's say, awareness. It's pure thought. There's no self-reflexivity with consciousness. Consciousness is self-reflexive. It's introspective, egoic in some sense. There is this self-conception as a moral agent. So you can have creatures, organisms that are sentient without having consciousness. I would say the work of Dr. Cleve Baxter has definitively shown that plants have sentience. Plants are sentient. They are aware. In fact, psi is actually an attribute of sentience. And so if it's just awareness and pure thought, well, one aspect of that is psi, psychic awareness. And then there's physical awareness, things that are more straightforward in the third dimensional construct in which we live. So if you have plants that exhibit psychic awareness, again, look at the work of Dr. Cleve Baxter, that doesn't mean that they have a central nervous system, a brain, etc. Now, conversely, you can have sentience in certain animals. We've done a lot of research on dogs, horses, certain apes and primates, and we find that there's like the emergence of some aspects of consciousness. They're certainly sentient. They can be taught language. They can have conscious intent. They can even think about the ways in which other organisms around them are sentient. Coco the gorilla can see that the human handlers are also sentient and interact with them. But if you think of consciousness on a spectrum, well, there's not a binary on-off toggle. It's a spectrum. So you can be more conscious, and you can even have humans that are not particularly conscious. Like the NPC meme, I think is pretty largely accurate. I think that there are a number of human beings who are not living very consciously. And I don't mean that as in the sense of they're not living mindfully. I mean, they're literally not that conscious. And I think the degree to which you're on psychotropic medications, or perhaps there could be some genetic role, perhaps there could be birth defects, cognitive issues, or just, it's just not something that is cultivated. And That's not to place any lesser value on those human beings. It's just to acknowledge the fact that there is a spectrum of consciousness. I think we all sort of intuit that. I think many of us try to resist admitting it, and I don't particularly care. I think that consciousness is on a spectrum. Sentience is different. You can be sentient but not conscious. You can be conscious but lack attributes of sentience. For instance, human beings are not very psychic. It seems to be latent, whereas plants and many, many animals, octopuses and horses, dolphins, are far more psychic than humans, and that has been researched extensively. So that's the distinction between sentience and consciousness. And so when we talk about reincarnation, we're talking about the consciousness, coming back, and you might be unaware of the previous life, but through certain practices, many people are ostensibly able to remember. And so again, there's degrees and categories of how compelling the evidence is. A past life reader is not compelling evidence. However, somebody who can remote view and then document that process, go out and verify, is certainly much more compelling. Back to the presentation. So twin cases are another thing that Stevenson analyzed. He analyzed, so in Reincarnation and Biology in particular, in that book, he documents one review of 42 twin pairs. Previous personalities could be identified for both twins in 31 of those 42 cases. In every one of those 31 pairs, the previous persons had known each other in some way, indicating that there are groups or connections that you can maintain across the span of time and across the cycle of reincarnation. There were no cases of complete strangers among the solved pairs. Timing of death are often in clusters. In many cases, twin cases, the previous personalities died on the same occasion by the same cause or within a relatively short interval, like the median interval of a few years when deaths were separate. Dominance and relational patterns frequently carry over. So where dominance could be assessed, the more dominant previous personality consistently became, the more dominant twin. Independent of birth order, whether they were born first or second, behavioral differences between the twins are often mirrored. The personalities and relationship dynamics of the previous lives are carried over, even in monozygotic or identical twins. Some examples, so Ramu and Raju Sharma in India. These were twin boys who remembered the lives of twin brothers murdered in a nearby village. Their statements, recognitions of people and places, behaviors, and in some accounts, physical signs reinforced each other. Stevenson found no prior contact between the two families that could explain the knowledge. Another example, Gillian and Jennifer Pollock in England. Identical twin girls who remembered their lives of the older sisters Joanna and Jacqueline, killed together in a road accident. Despite genetic identity, the twins showed distinct behaviors and physical traits, including birthmarks, that aligned with the different previous sisters. Stevenson regarded this and similar cases as among the stronger evidence for reincarnation because the genetic identity cannot account for the divergences. Absolutely. Twin cases illustrate both continuity of relationship patterns and the possibility of coordinated returns. They also highlight that monozygotic twins can still diverge in ways that track different previous life identities, which is difficult for purely genetic explanations. Nature versus nurture. And most people say, well, the environment contributes heavily to the divergence in twin personalities because the twins are identical genetically in monozygotic twins. And so the environment must account for the differences. But immediately from 2 years old, 3 years old, they're expressing dramatic differences that then map over to the claimed previous lives that also are corroborated with birthmarks in some cases. Mind-blowing stuff. We also have the bizarre instances of cases involving predicted reincarnation. So pre-mortem predictions, as they're called. In a subset of cases, the dying person explicitly states an intention to return, often naming the future parents, the sex of the child, or specific physical signs, birthmarks or scars, by which recognition will occur. These statements are sometimes made years before the relevant birth. Classic examples include Tlignit cases from Alaska. Victor Vincent told his niece he would return as her next son and pointed out surgical scars that would reappear as birthmarks. The child Corliss Chotkin Jr. was later born with corresponding marks and showed matching behavioral traits, including stuttering, which the father did. The case of William George Sr. similarly told his son and daughter-in-law that if rebirth was real, he would return as their child with specific moles as identifiers. The subsequent child matched the prediction. Announcing dreams. So a related and frequent feature, especially among the Tlingit and the Burmese cases, where a deceased person appears in a dream, usually to the future mother, sometimes to another relative, and announces the intention to be reborn into that family. Now, timing differs by culture. Among the Tlingit, the dreams often occur late in pregnancy. Among the Burmese, they often occur before conception. That's crazy. Stevenson documented numerous such dreams that preceded verified cases. These cases gain strength when prediction is specific, so they name the parents, they name birthmarks, and no other explanation seems to fit. Some cases involve temporal overlap, so conception occurring before the previous person's death. Now that is interesting. That means you have to come back within months, right? Potentially even weeks. Now, we talked about, I mentioned that I would give the devil's advocate position and try to rebut these. And these are some of the claims that are arguing against reincarnation. Fraud, parental coaching, or cryptomnesia. So cryptomnesia is a form of confabulation. Cryptomnesia is where you see a story, hear a story, see a picture, a video, and then you falsely internalize that as one of your own memories. So some other experience you then take account for or attribute to your own past. And these are ruled out in the best cases by contemporaneous written records made before verification and by the young age of the subjects. In fact, it's usually the opposite. The parents are, if they're coaching at all, they're trying to coach the child out of this lunacy, this imaginative confabulation or cryptomnesia. So genetic memory or inherited trauma is another explanation, and this fails to account for the detailed knowledge that the children have of very specific things, including names, nicknames, birthdays, everything we mentioned, residences, jobs, relationships, personal objects, etc., etc. It also fails to, certain birthmarks can't be explained by this. Non-heritable wounds. Yeah, there are some traits that are heritable, but scars, wounds, birthmarks, no, that's not heritable. We talked about the super psi hypothesis, so I'm not going to rehash that. Cultural construction is another excuse. I should say rebuttal. Cultural construction is this explanation where higher reporting rates in believing cultures can influence the child to make those claims, and then the adults also want it to be true, and so they skew details and stretch the truth and lean into hyperbole and sort of concoct these stories around these children. Stevenson and Tucker often argue that reincarnation is the simplest, most parsimonious, most comprehensive explanation that requires the fewest rational jumps, that requires the least amount of various explanations that have to come together to make it happen. Reincarnation is a singular explanation as opposed to multiple things having to occur. And of course, the sheer volume of their work really should make the average person question these things. And so for the last part of this conversation, I want to talk about the ontological implications. And we talked about this book earlier, Thanosis. It's an awesome text. And, you know, he puts forward a very compelling hypothesis that doesn't just lean on reincarnation data. Instead, it leans on near-death experiences. It leans on out-of-body experiences. It leans on lucid dreaming. It leans on all of the things that we mentioned at the beginning of the show. There's about a dozen, maybe 24 different phenomena that converge and lend credence to the existence of a soul, a spirit, and also the plausibility for reincarnation to be the most likely post-mortem situation. So Giorgiani puts forward, he says, the thesis that emerges is unmistakable. Survival research confronts us with a porous and pluralistic ontology of personhood. Identity is not a sealed unit marching intact across lifetimes. It is a composite capable of rupture, replacement, division, and cohabitation. The self proves to be a battlefield where wills contend, merge, and divide, sometimes across the threshold of death itself. Against both the reductionist dismissal of materialism and the flattening absorption of monistic idealism, I call here for Jamesian pluralism that takes seriously this plurality of selves, this contested territory of consciousness. It is only in such a cosmos, one of radical openness, of genuine tragedy and transformation, that survival is meaningful. And so Giorgiani puts forward the idea that the self, the soul within the body, is capable of degradation, capable of some sort of ethereal harm, of accruing damage. Conversely, it's capable of developing, refining, improving, and, you know, self-motivation, agency, and cultivation of knowledge, of morality, of various psychic abilities, and the like. And so your soul is just like you as a person. It can evolve, it can devolve, and I think he makes the case quite powerfully in Thanosis that that is the case, that there are aspects of the self which are, that the self is mutable, it is changeable, it is not a fixed thing. And so, you know, if we take a look around us and we see that there are many souls that are trapped in damaged bodies, blind, deaf, certain birth defects, certain heritable diseases, sickle cell anemia, progeria, Down syndrome, things like this. There are souls that are in these bodies that will get a second chance. Well, the same way that souls, the same way that the physical body can have these deficits, the soul can too. And he takes the approach, the explanation that it is an information theoretic universe, and that the self is an informational construct. Now, what does that even mean? Do you have to subscribe to that? Does that challenge a religious belief that you may have? I would argue not necessarily. I would say we're all talking about the same thing at the end of the day. We're the, blindfolded men, the 5 blindfolded men describing the elephant as a rope, a ladder, a tree, a vase. And so everyone is describing it using different adjectives based on their particular perspective. And maybe we're all trying to kind of triangulate the truth of what a soul is and what the universe is. And the religious jargon or vernacular is just a different means of explaining things that might be proposed scientifically in a different way. They don't necessarily have to compete or invalidate each other. I think I'm going to read one more excerpt from Thanosis here. Yeah, so he says, I advance a thesis as radical as it is inevitable. The soul is not an ethereal vapor, nor a mere neurological epiphenomenon, but an informational architecture, a persisting configuration of code in a quantum computational cosmos. Building upon Shannon's formalization of the bit, Landauer's principle that information is physical, Wheeler's it from bit, and Vopson's contention that information carries mass, I argue that what endures beyond death is not a ghostly essence, but executable software running on the server side of the simulacrum. From this vantage point, physics itself reveals its underlying logic as code. Quantum indeterminacy mirrors rendering optimization in a virtual world, where unobserved regions are not computed until called by an observer. Planck time is the universal frame rate. Entanglement is server-level synchronization. The laws of physics are not decrees, but protocols, amendable subroutines. Within this architecture, reincarnation is the reinstallation of a personality file. Karma, the algorithmic integration of past code. Astrology, a timed subroutine. Telepathy and precognition queries into memory and predictive buffers. Even the bizarre anomalies of the Mandela effect disclose themselves as artifacts of version control, rollbacks, branch merges, bleed-throughs from parallel runs of the simulation. This computational ontology makes sense of phenomena that confound both reductive materialism and naive spiritualism. Ghosts become lingering processes at a given address in the code. Poltergeists, loops of living agent psi in emotionally charged states. Possession, an overlay of one's personality file onto another's avatar. Bilocation, concurrent instancing. Xenoglossy, reactivation of dormant linguistic subroutines. Split reincarnation, 2 children recalling the same past life, reflects the duplication of a save file into multiple terminals. Even the life review at death is intelligible as a checksum verification before archive and redeployment. And so the more anomalies we observe in the physical universe that seem to point to code as the underlying logic to our reality, and that the observer has an effect on that reality, and that the consciousness is the observer, that means that we are in control. That means that we can do miracles. That means that we are capable of incredible things that defy our current models of physics. And reincarnation is just the consciousness coming back, the observer coming back to learn and grow, or waste more time, or not learn lessons. Like, you have free will, right? Yeah. So in Thanosis, Giorgiani argues for this pluralistic panpsychism. And panpsychism, for those who don't know, is just this idea that mind is a part of the universe, that mind is not an emergent property of the brain. It's not local to your brain. It's in fact one of the substrates of the universe, and that consciousness or mind is ubiquitous. And just like in the forest floor, you have a mycelial network, and then occasionally a mushroom will pop up out of the ground. The mind and the consciousness, at least sentience, pops into a life form anytime it can. And then it begins the process of the evolution of consciousness. And I think one of the most interesting things that Giorgiani talks about in Theanosis, relying on forensic cases just like Stevenson did, very, strict in methodological approaches. He talks about these very interesting cases where, for instance, one individual died, was clinically dead, and then upon reviving, a different personality incarnated in that physical form. This was in India, and I believe it was actually a man. It was either a man that came into the woman's body, or it was a woman that incarnated in this deceased man's body. So when the person was brought back to life, the person was like, whoa, I am not who you guys say I am. I'm this person. And it was a different gender. And they were like, how can we investigate this? And they found, based on the person's name that they were claiming to be, that person had died many miles away in a neighboring town or village. And that's, again, very bizarre, very fascinating. And it sort of stretches the imagination to explain, okay, so just because the person was brought back to life, that body isn't necessarily reserved for the consciousness that just exited to come back in. Maybe that consciousness already caught the next bus in the afterlife, and there was an empty vehicle, and they're like, okay, well, this body's coming back to life. Who wants it? And maybe a very assertive soul that had just died, again, in a nearby area, slipped in. And fascinating stuff. Giorgiani also discusses instances where there seem to have been multiple souls incarnated in one body. This often is described as multiple personality disorder, or more recently dissociative identity disorder, and that absolutely may be some sort of psychological splintering into protective archetypes within the person in a response to trauma. Absolutely. That could explain 100% of the cases. But there are some instances that he goes through, some cases that he goes through in Theanosis that seem to challenge that, where actually it might be, especially with respect to xenoglossy and other aspects, that there were alters within this person that had a number of unexplainable traits that, like the other person, the main soul, the main personality complex didn't possess. So possession, right? That's actually the word. I just said it. Maybe that's all that possession is, right? And now it certainly could be a lot more than that, because it seems like there's some demonic stuff that happens, but who knows? And so I think another aspect to this whole conversation, before we summarize and before we close out, is most people hear about near-death experiences as a very positive thing, and that is the reporting bias And it's also a bias of the compilers of these stories, the authors of these books. They often omit, almost invariably omit, the darker, more coercive, more traumatic past life, out-of-body experiences, or sorry, near-death experiences, rather. And so there's, this skewing towards it's all love and light, and there's a tunnel of light, and there are angels playing harps, and you see your deceased relatives, and you're welcomed into your particular religious avatar's arms, whether it's Jesus or Krishna or whoever. And actually, just as often as there are positive accounts of near-death experiences, there are also dark, demonic, scary, nightmarish ones. And there's a lot of information on the internet out there about them, so you can certainly go down that rabbit hole if you want. There seem to be very parasitic situations that people have found themselves in. Just as some people come back from near-death experiences and they're permanently changed for the better, well, there are just as many where they're permanently scarred from these experiences. And so I suppose that some people would rationalize that, explain that away by saying this was a test. It was a moment where you had to experience a taste of hell to snap you out of your harmful ways or degenerate ways. And a lot of these people are very good people, at least according to the case studies and the reports. So these are people who are like philanthropists or avid churchgoers or like very generous individuals, and they have these nightmarish experiences, and they're like, why the heck did that happen to me? So all of this evidence that we've discussed in today's presentation is not proof of reincarnation, but it certainly leans in that direction. And I would say, again, for the 15th time, the most parsimonious explanation that requires the least logical jumps and assumptions, that has the most explanatory power, particularly with the congenital birth defects, birthmarks, and scars, particularly with the twin cases, particularly with the monozygotic twin cases, that there is a phenomenon here to deal with, that simple explanations fail, that the religious community needs to address. And that's not like a challenge to a fight. It's simply an invitation to the discussion. And I think it's a beautiful subject. Personally, I strive to reform my character, improve and develop my personality over time, expand my psychic abilities, increase the moral, increase my ethical fiber of my being. And I think that most people do. There are many people, of course, particularly with bad childhoods, who are exceptions to that. Many people don't try to improve themselves. But I think that the reincarnation hypothesis is one that offers you a lot of hope. Because if you're in a bad life, if you're in a bad incarnation, you can say, well, at least I'll get many more chances. And if you are born blind or deaf or something of that nature, that you don't have to look forward to that in the next life. Although there are many instances where birthmarks and scars carry over, there are many more where they don't. And so I think reincarnation is very hopeful. I think it's very beautiful. I think it is the most simple explanation for a plurality of phenomena that converge around the postmortem subject. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you're interested in sharing, you can leave them in the comment section, and I'll certainly get back to you. I love this subject, and I don't understand why some people choose to ignore it. I wish that people would embrace it and they would just say, this is fascinating. Like, regardless of your culture or your religion, this is fascinating stuff. Let me decide to consciously review the material. And again, anyone who's just joining us and is curious for more, you can go to YouTube and type in The Ghost Inside My Child. This is a television series. There are at least 13 free episodes on YouTube, and we showed a couple of excerpts today from one of them. And you can also pick up a copy of Children Who Remember Previous Lives. This is an awesome read, unfortunately no audiobook, by Dr. Ian Stevenson, 40 years of research on the subject. I would also recommend you get your copy of Thanosis by Jason Reza Georgiani. This is a very dense philosophical investigation, scientific investigation, and it's not for the lighthearted. You have been warned. You're going to want to read this book with a pen in hand. You're going to end up reading each paragraph 3 times at least. Everyone I know who has read this, we've ended up having some of the most incredible conversations thereafter, and it's going to expand your awareness of the phenomena that are documented. It is not just going to pontificate without bringing the receipts. He's very well sourced with his citations, and I think he puts forward very compelling arguments. So I'm a huge fan. I would get your copy, read it for yourself, see what you think. I'm going to put this in an upcoming Adam's Book Club in our newsletter. If you're subscribed, you got this one in our last one. For everybody who's a paying member, we love you so much. You guys are incredible. Thank you for supporting Dauntless through thick and thin. Head over to dauntlessdialogue.com. We have a brand new film, Order Out of Chaos Volume 6, Put Options. It's an incredible work of art. You will learn a thing or two, and this is just in time for the 25th anniversary of 9/11. Now, if you go to our Rumble channel, you will see that right here on top, I have the first 3 installments of Order Out of Chaos for a total of 1 hour, 4 minutes, and 42 seconds. Check that out. Share that around. It's that time of year. Let's see if we can get a few more 1,000 views on this. And if you want to support us and you're already a member, or you aren't a member but you want to support us in a different way, click on Shop. Shop is going to bring you to the Dauntless merch store over at Rise Attire. You can pick up your awesome gear today, and it really helps us pay the bills. It helps us grow and reach new people. You can also click on Signature Series, and you'll find the Vibes collection. We have 2 signature series around the Vibes series on our website, and these are really cool designs. I love the stuff. There's stuff for guys and gals, and if you click Browse Full Collection, you'll find dozens of different styles for summer and winter. And we really appreciate you guys supporting the channel. Thank you, everyone who came to hang out. Special shout out to Andrew, because I know this is a subject we've talked about, and I hope you tuned in for the entirety and learned a thing or two. And shoot me a message if you did. We can talk about it some more. I love you guys so much, and I'll catch you guys next week. On the flip side, peace.